The air was thick with tension, the silence heavier than any scream. Holly's breath hitched as she yanked at the metal cuffs, her wrists burning against the cold steel. The slow, mechanical whir of the platform beneath her sent chills up her spine. She was turning, rotating, forced to face them all. Figures emerged from the darkness, stepping into the flickering industrial light one by one. Shadows first, then faces. Kevin, Mark, Jack, Austin, more. Their eyes cut through her, some wide with disbelief, others dark with fury. The weight of their stares pressed against her skin, suffocating. No, 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 no. Her pulse pounded in her skull. Her mouth went dry. She yanked at the cuffs again. Harder this time. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. Then she saw him. Tom standing at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. His presence sucked the air from the room. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't furious. He was worse. Calm, patient, like a man who had already won. He lifted his phone. Camera locked on her recording. "You always loved the chase," Tom murmured, his voice even, almost gentle. "Let's see how it feels when you're the one being hunted." Holly's heart stopped. The platform lurched. The lights above her buzzed, blinding. The world spun. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't walking away from this. Not tonight. Not ever. Weeks earlier. That morning was quiet. Still sunlight, filtered through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the walls. Outside, a light breeze rustled the old maple tree, carrying the crisp bite of early autumn in suburban Chicago. Tom Harrison's life changed forever on Saturday, September 25th. That morning, the world around him was profoundly still, as though it hadn't yet decided to fully wake up. The early sun filtered through the blinds in long golden stripes, cutting across the bedroom walls in neat segments of light and shadow. Outside, suburban Chicago looked like a postcard of calm. The old maple tree in the front yard shuffled its leaves in a gentle breeze, and the crisp air carried the faint smell of early autumn. It was the kind of day you could almost see the heat of summer, giving way to cooler winds, the shift poised. On a delicate balance, Tom stirred in bed before Holly did, which was nothing new. He'd been a chronic early riser his entire life, partly from habit, partly from the anxiety that came with running his own small empire of coffee shops. Always more to do, always something to plan. He turned over to look at Holly for a moment. Her hair was scattered across the pillow in soft coils, and the steady rhythm of her breathing gave him a small measure of comfort. They'd been married for 6 years, but he still felt a bolt of gratitude whenever he really looked at her. It was the kind of awe that said, "How did a guy like me get a woman like her?" He slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to disturb her. Passing by the window, he noticed a hawk circling in the distance, gliding lazily on the updrafts. The house creaked in the mild wind, the way older houses sometimes do, like an old friend clearing its throat. He walked into the kitchen and flipped on the coffee maker, the comforting hum and gurgle immediately filling the space with a rich, nutty aroma. In the half-light of the kitchen, he found a sense of peace in the routine of preparing breakfast. It felt like a small offering to the day, a normal ritual that grounded him whenever life got frantic. He cracked eggs into a bowl, whisking them until they foamed yellow, then tossed in bacon strips on the sizzling pan. 2 slices of toast, a pat of butter, and strawberry jam, Holly's go-to. He thought about the last few weeks, how they'd been so busy and hardly had any real time together. She'd been traveling more often for her floral boutique, attending trade shows, meeting new suppliers. He'd been expanding his coffee chain across Illinois, inking deals with local property owners. They were moving in parallel directions, side by side, but sometimes Tom worried they weren't truly intersecting anymore. A soft shuffling sound in the hallway pulled him out of his thoughts. Holly appeared at the kitchen entrance, wearing her fluffy robe, hair still a tangled cloud of bedhead. She looked at him with a half smile, eyes warm but drowsy. "Smells amazing," she said, her voice still low from sleep. She settled onto a wooden chair at the small breakfast table, letting out a gentle sigh. The kitchen light made her eyes look brighter, reflecting little flecks of gold. He returned her smile. "Can't send." My wife off on an empty stomach, he teased, dividing the eggs onto 2 plates. She reached for his hand when he joined her at the table, and he let his fingers close over hers. He couldn't help thinking, even with all the hustle, the uncertain tension he sometimes felt. He still adored her. He adored the softness of her voice, the shape of her smile, how she laughed at his dumb jokes. He'd never imagined he could be so lucky. The domestic stillness of the moment was a welcome distraction from the anxious buzz that usually filled his mind. They ate slowly, trading comfortable small talk. Holly teased him about how he always insisted on checking things twice: her phone charger, the jacket she was bringing, the plane boarding pass. He teased back that he'd keep reminding her of things, until they were both 90. She laughed in that easy, musical way that never failed to melt a piece of his heart. It felt good, simple, unforced. "It's just 3 days, Tom," she said, finishing up her coffee with a final, content sip. "You won't even notice I'm gone." He forced a playful grin. "I'll notice the silence," he said. But in his head, he thought, "The house feels empty the minute you're out the door." By noon, Holly was zipping up her suitcase in the living room, double-checking everything. She pulled on her favorite black jacket over a thin beige sweater, an outfit that always struck Tom as effortlessly classy. There was a certain natural elegance to her, as though she never had to try too hard. He admired her for that. He stood near the window, peering out between the curtains at the quiet Saint. It was a calm neighborhood, the kind where people prided themselves on manicured lawns and friendly nods if you happened to be outside at the same time. It gave Tom solace, knowing that their home was in a place like this. At exactly 1:00 p.m., a yellow cab rolled up to the curb. The driver, a balding man in a Cubs cap, got out and popped the trunk ready to stow her suitcase. Tom felt a subtle pinch in his chest. He never liked her leaving, even if she was just crossing state lines for a few days. He followed her onto the porch, where the breeze carried the faint scent of gasoline from the cab's exhaust and that crisp autumn bite that spoke of changing leaves. She slipped her arms around him, and he breathed in her perfume, a light floral scent that made him think of springtime. "Tell Janet I said hi," he murmured, pressing his lips softly to her temple. "Come back soon, I'll miss you." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "I miss you too," she whispered, smiling gently before giving him a warm, quick kiss, the same way she always did right before getting into a cab. He watched her climb into the back seat, the driver shutting the trunk with a quick slam. The cab pulled away, disappearing around the curve in the road until all Tom could see were the receding red taillights. Tom always felt heavier whenever she was away. At 2:20 p.m., his phone vibrated with a text. "Just boarded. Love you." He couldn't help smiling, tapping out his quick reply. "Safe travels. Love you too." The day stretched out in front of him like a barren field. Without her bustling around or even just the soft hum of her presence, the house felt unnaturally quiet. To kill time, he went to the garage, his sanctuary of sorts where he kept tools, spare parts, and random gizmos from his coffee shops. He flipped on the radio, tuning it to Chicago's finest rock, letting the music spill into the dusty, sunlit space that smelled faintly of oil and sawdust. As he sorted through an old box of bolts, he found himself humming along to a familiar tune. He felt strangely content, imagining Holly settling into her seat on the Amtrak train, maybe ordering coffee from the snack car, probably flipping through a fashion magazine or checking out new flower trends on her phone. Then, the DJ's voice interrupted the music, cutting in with a jarring sense of urgency. Breaking news: at approximately 4:00 p.m., an Amtrak Empire Builder passenger train derailed near Joplin, Montana. Early reports confirm multiple injuries and fatalities. Tom's hand froze mid-movement, a handful of bolts slipping from his grip, clattering onto the concrete floor like tiny metallic raindrops. His heart gave a violent lurch. He could almost hear the blood rushing in his ears. That was her train. "Oh God," the words tumbled out in a shaky whisper. His brain spun in frantic circles. He patted himself, searching for his phone, found it in his back pocket, fumbled to unlock it, almost dropped it. One ring, 2 rings. Voicemail. He tried again, heart hammering so hard he could feel the throb in his throat again. No answer. A third attempt straight to voicemail. Finally, he sent a terse text. "Holly, call me now." He stared at his phone, the seconds ticking by in excruciating slowness. Then the screen lit up with a new text. Holly. His heart clenched. He almost didn't want to look, terrified of what it might say. "I'm fine. I made it." He let out a trembling breath, relief rushing through him. But that relief was short-lived. It was replaced almost immediately by an unsettling tingle of confusion. He read it again and again. The words looked wrong. They didn't match reality. She made it. He breathed aloud, eyebrows knitting together. That didn't make sense. The next second, he was thumbing the call button. This time, the line rang 3 times before she answered. "Hey, love." Her voice sounded light and almost cheerful, far from the panic he would have expected after a derailment. He had imagined sirens wailing, frantic announcements, terrified passengers. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Holly, thank God. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said. "Why are you so worried?" He raked his fingers through his hair, breathing deeply to keep his voice steady. "Your train derailed, Hall. It's all over the news. People are dead." There was a brief pause over the faint crackle of the call. He heard her inhale sharply. "Oh," she said, voice unsteady for half a second before she regained control. "I missed. I ended up catching the next train, so I wasn't there." Tom leaned against his workbench, letting the radio's background chatter drift into a meaningless buzz. The edges of his vision blurred. "Jesus, you scared the hell out of me." But even as relief washed over him, an odd sense of disquiet tugged at his gut. Something wasn't adding up. She had texted him at 2:20 p.m. to say she'd boarded. That was precisely when the Empire builder left the station. If she'd missed the original train, why send that text? The timeline smelled off, and the sinking feeling in his stomach told him so. "Look," she said softly, as if sensing his unease. "I'm fine, okay? I'm so sorry you worried. It's just been a crazy day. I'll call you when I get to Janet's." He forced himself to speak. "Okay," he whispered. "Just be safe." They hung up. Tom stared down at the phone, which now felt heavier than any tool in the garage. If Holly had missed her train, she would have said so right away. She had texted him as though everything was normal, and only after the derailment hit the news did she claim she'd taken another train. His thoughts spiraled a swarm of wasps in his skull. Lies. He recognized them by the small cracks in the story. He checked the time. By now, Holly should be en route to her sister's. He waited an hour, pacing the garage, ignoring the music, and occasionally picking up random bolts only to set them right back down. Sweat beaded on his forehead, even though the air was cool. Finally, he dialed Janet's number. "Hey," he said the instant she picked up. "Can you put Holly on the phone for a second?" A tiny, loaded silence. "Oh, she's in the shower right now," Janet said, her voice a practiced casualness that set off alarms in Tom's mind. "I'll let her know you called." Tom stared hard at a stain on the concrete. His knuckles tightened around the phone. "She was lying, right?" he managed. "Thanks." He ended the call. The phone's screen went dark, reflecting his own face back at him, twisted in confusion and a hurt that was beginning to churn into anger. Janet was covering for Holly, and he had no clue why. His stomach lurched. The first unwelcome thought burned its way in. She's cheating. The possibility slashed through him like a jagged blade. For a moment, he stood there, hands trembling, eyes shut, as though he could refuse to let this possibility sink into his bones. But it was too late. The suspicion was there now, an uninvited guest that refused to leave. That night, Tom was in bed but not really sleeping. The house was dark, every creak and sigh of the old structure amplified. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling and the muted glow of the street lamp outside. His mind was a minefield of anxious thoughts, each one ready to detonate the moment he dared inch closer to certainty. He got up, wandering the house with aimless footsteps. He didn't flick on a single light, not wanting to shatter the fragile stillness or break the illusion that everything was normal. Eventually, he found himself in the small study Holly used for paperwork, her laptop, and the various receipts she kept for her boutique. The faint smell of her perfume lingered, making him dizzy with memory and worry. Quietly, he opened her desk drawer. Inside, he found a pile of business cards, half-used notebooks, random receipts for flower shipments. Then a photo. The sight of it jolted him. It was from 6 years ago when they were freshly in love. They were on a small boat somewhere on Lake Mi. Big smiles plastered on their sun-warmed faces. She'd been wearing a casual summer dress while he clutched a fishing rod with a triumphant grin. The memory of that day flickered in his head. The fish she'd caught. The way she'd screamed and nearly dropped it. And that unstoppable laughter they'd shared afterward. His thumb traced the edges of the photo. If she's lying to me now, was any of that real? His chest felt tight, like the air was too thick. Holly had always been private about her past, especially the tougher parts. He recalled the first time he met Janet and learned about Holly's childhood, bouncing between foster homes, never truly settling. He'd done everything in his power to show her she was safe with him, that she was valued and loved. He had built a life that he hoped would make her feel secure. But maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe there was a hole in her heart he could never fill. Squeezing his eyes shut, he tucked the photo back where he found it and trudged out of the study. The house felt colder than ever. He found himself remembering how they met. It had been on a dating app, ironically. He was in his early 40s, single and too busy with his expanding coffee business to invest real time into social life. A friend had nudged him to try the app just for fun, bragging about how he'd met his own girlfriend online. Tom scoffed at first. He didn't like the idea of scrolling through profiles, but one rainy night, bored in his quiet apartment, he gave. Days later, Holly's message popped up. "Hey there, looks like we're a perfect match." He remembered reading that and feeling an unexpected spark of hope. They'd clicked so quickly, both ambitious, both lovers of small businesses, both crazy about the Chicago White Sox. They bonded over a love of fishing, sharing silly stories of near misses and the one that got away. 6 months after that, they were married, celebrating on Oak Street Beach, letting the water soak their ankles as they pledged their lives to each other. It had felt spontaneous and intense, something that told him this is it. She's the one. They picked a suburban area, Hinsdale, with its quiet streets, leafy trees, and that sense of community that city life often lacks. For a while, everything was a dream. He found success in his coffee shops. She opened a floral boutique that thrived. And if she was sometimes cautious, sometimes closed off about her past, he didn't push. He had enough love for them both. Or, so he believed. 3 years passed in a blur of hectic business expansions and long flights for her flower sourcing trips. Time became slippery. They rarely had a night off together. When they did, it felt rushed, overshadowed by the knowledge that soon one of them would be gone again. Tom started doing things, buying cars, planning luxury vacations, anything to keep that spark alive. He wanted to show her that she deserved every nice thing life had to offer. The day he bought the Aston Martin for himself and the Jaguar for her stood out. She'd hopped out of her taxi, saw the glossy new Jaguar in the driveway, and her eyes practically lit up like a fireworks show, the memory of her running her hand along that hood. Eyes dancing with excitement still brought a slight smile to his face. Even now, they'd driven off into the night, blasting music on the highway, city lights flashing around them. It was freedom, pure adrenaline, the two of them side by side, unstoppable in their chase for success and thrill. But little changes crept in, like drops of dye in clear water, gradually coloring everything. Holly cut her hair short. After years of proclaiming she loved her natural waves, she started wearing more daring clothes, talking about wilder nightlife in the cities she visited, sharing half-finished anecdotes about clubs he'd never heard of. She bought new lingerie, introduced more playful elements into their bedroom, which at first excited him. But sometimes he felt like he was watching a different woman. She was searching for something. He just didn't know if it included him. A week ago, they had one of those quiet nights at home. Tom remembered sitting on the couch, swirling ice in his whiskey glass. Feeling strangely distant despite being physically next to her, she leaned on his shoulder, scrolling through something on her phone. "Look at this bouquet," she said casually, flipping the screen around to show him a photo of wild peonies, a massive arrangement that looked like something from a glossy magazine. He nodded, making a soft sound of approval. He'd always found her passion for flowers beautiful, like she was taking pieces of nature and giving them to people in small, fragrant bundles of joy. But as his gaze flicked to the top of her screen, he noticed something else. That old dating apps icon tucked among her other apps, a chill threaded down his spine. "You never deleted it?" he asked lightly, trying to keep his tone casual as he handed her back the phone. Inside, he was reeling. Why was that still there? She glanced at the screen and let out a short laugh, brushing off the question with ease. "That it's just a souvenir, you know. Our relationship started there. I haven't even opened it in forever. Guess I'm sentimental or just lazy about uninstalling." She scooted closer, placing a quick kiss on his jaw. "I blocked my account ages ago," she said softly. "I already found what I was looking for." A sweet answer, one that should have comforted him, and maybe it did a little in that moment. But 3 nights later, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He told himself not to be paranoid. Yet every time she picked up her phone, he fought the urge to see if she was thumbing through that app. He never asked her again, too afraid of sounding like the jealous husband. He believed they were happy. He wanted them to be happy. Then came Saturday, September 25th, a day that began so peacefully. Holly left, the Amtrak train derailed, and she claimed she hadn't been on it. The phone calls with Janet confirmed they were lying about something. Tom's suspicion was now a living, breathing thing. Clawing at his insides, he sat in the living room that evening. The lights turned off, the half-melted ice in his whiskey glass, reflecting the faint glow of the street outside. He'd never felt so alone. The TV murmured in the background, some news channel continuing coverage of the derailment. Words like fatalities, investigation, and rescue operation drifted through the still air, each one a punch to his gut. The fact that Holly had lied about being on that train weighed on him more heavily than the tragedy itself. He tried to piece together her possible reasons: a conference for her floral business, a secret trip with friends. No, none of that explained the complexity of her cover-up. She told him she'd boarded at 2:20 p.m., but then used the derailment as an excuse for missing that very train. Janet was covering for her, lying that Holly was in the shower. If it was something harmless, why hide it? Every logical route pointed to Ree's conclusion he didn't want to face. She was with someone else. Tom swallowed back the surge of nausea. The idea of Holly in another man's arms was unthinkable, but it had invaded his reality like a parasite. He refused to lose her without a fight. But how could he fight something he couldn't see? He had to know the truth, whatever it was. He didn't sleep that night. He dozed off once or twice, jolting awake every time he pictured Holly walking into a hotel room with a stranger or meeting someone at a bar in some distant city. By the time the sky began to lighten, he was done. The ache in his muscles was overshadowed by a sharper pain in his chest. In the morning, footsteps sounded on the porch. He shot upright and rushed to the foyer. Through the frosted glass, he could see the shape of a taxi. Holly was back earlier than he expected. He braced himself, forcing a smile onto his face as she opened the front door. A wave of cold air accompanied her, along with the faint city smells from outside, fuel exhaust and drying leaves. "I'm home," she called, sounding almost cheerful, as if she were returning from a carefree weekend. She stepped inside, setting her small suitcase by the door. She was dressed in dark jeans and a stylish coat, her hair neatly brushed, though he could see hints of tension behind her bright eyes. He swallowed. "Hey," he said softly, holding out a cup of coffee he'd poured for her moments ago, anticipating her arrival. "How was Wisconsin Dells?" She wrapped an arm around his waist, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. "Pretty good," she said, sipping the coffee. "Janet says hi. We mostly just relaxed. Nothing crazy." He nodded, forcing a neutral expression. "She's lying so easily." "I'm glad," he muttered. "I was starting to worry when I heard about that derailment." Holly waved a hand dismissively, her tone too breezy. "I told you I missed that train." "Lucky me, right?" She flashed a quick smile. "Anyway, I'm exhausted. I might take a nap, but maybe we can do something nice tonight." "Dinner." He exhaled slowly. Despite his swirling thoughts, there was a push inside him, urging him to play along to keep the peace. "How about Boca?" he offered, naming one of her favorite spots in the city. A place with chic decor, refined dishes, somewhere you could dress up and pretend everything was perfect. Her eyes lit up. "You always know how to make me feel special." "Sure, let's do it." That evening, Tom dressed in a dark sweater and slacks while Holly wore a sleek black dress, fitted enough to showcase her figure without being flashy. They took the Aston Martin, cruising along the highway toward the restaurant. For a short while, there was a semblance of normalcy. They chatted about future travel plans. She told him about a new flower variety she wanted to import from Europe. He talked about a promotional idea for his coffee shops, seasonal pumpkin spice lattes, maybe a new line of artisanal pastries. Inside Boca, they were greeted by the low hum of conversation and the gentle clink of glasses and cutlery. The lighting was warm, and the fragrance of fresh herbs and spices drifted from the open kitchen. They talked about inconsequential things. Over dinner, funny memes, the new Netflix show everyone was raving about. If Tom ignored the twist in his gut, it almost felt like old times. She looked so comfortable, her laugh coming easily. She even reached across the table a couple of times to brush her fingers over his hand. He hated that he couldn't enjoy it fully. A voice in his head kept reminding him of the app icon he'd seen on her phone. The lies about the train, the flustered stammer, and Janet's voice. Still, he forced himself to smile through dessert because the alternative was to start an ugly confrontation right there in the restaurant. Part of him feared that if he pressed too hard, she'd vanish from his life. Another part of him just wanted to rip the truth out of her. Consequences be damned. After dinner, they returned home. The air had turned chillier, a subtle sign that summer was firmly behind them. Holly paused at the front door, turning to Tom with a warm, playful smile. "You're not tired yet, are you?" she asked in a teasing tone, a sparkle in her gaze. He swallowed, the conflicting surge of desire and doubt tangling in his chest. "Not if you're not," he said, curling an arm around her waist in a sudden move. He scooped her into his arms, and she gave a delighted yelp of surprise, laughter spilling into the night air. It felt good, even if it was overshadowed by the knowledge that something was wrong. Inside, the house welcomed them with its familiar hush. They ended the night in a tangle of sheets, where she was all soft laughter and heated whispers against his skin. Yet even in those intimate moments, Tom sensed a distance lurking behind her kisses like she was there. But part of her mind was already somewhere else. The next morning, the clock showed 7:30 a.m. when Tom dragged himself out of bed, leaving Holly still dozing. He walked into the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and stared at the swirl of steam rising into the air. The day's possibilities weighed heavily on him. He could pretend none of this was happening, or he could find out the truth, no matter how painful. The decision was made for him when he glanced at the table, where Holly had left her phone to charge as if pulled by a magnet. He stepped closer, half tempted to check, but the desire warred with his better judgment. He heard her stirring in the bedroom, so he backed away, unwilling to cross that final privacy line just yet. Soon after, she left to run errands. Something about needing supplies for the shop, maybe new ribbon or vases. The moment she was gone, he felt the tension in the house tighten like a coil. He could no longer ignore that constant prickle of dread. He grabbed his own phone. His hands felt clammy as he opened the app store. His heart hammered as he typed in the name of the dating app, the same one where he'd first met Holly. A swirl of nauseating irony seeped through him. He never thought he'd find himself here again. Not after everything. The app downloaded with a bright little icon, so cheerful and harmless looking. He opened it, his mind racing. A new account, fake name, fake photo. He chose something generic enough to blend into the background of countless other men searching or prowling, or just passing the time. He took a few shaky breaths, tapped the final button, and the interface greeted him with an onslaught of potential matches in his area. Within seconds, the memory of Holly's picture on his phone, her brand new dress, that lively grin flashed in his head. "Please don't be here," he begged silently. "Please don't be here." He typed her name into the search field, or at least the name he knew she'd likely use if she was hiding. Another wave of nausea churned in his stomach. The app spun, searching 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then the screen populated her photo. Recent, possibly taken only weeks ago, wearing that sleek dress he'd bought for her birthday last month. She had her hair styled in that new shortcut. She looked radiant, confident, maybe a little sultry. And it wasn't an outdated profile. It was active. The words beneath her name read, "Open to new adventures." Tom's vision swam. A spike of cold fear sliced through him, followed by a hot flash of anger. His breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening until it was painful to inhale. He stared at the profile for a long moment, uncertain what to do. Part of him wanted to fling the phone across the room because seeing her face there, advertising her availability to strangers, was the most brutal confirmation of his worst fears. Should he confront her right this second? Pack her things? Call a lawyer? A swirl of confusion, heartbreak, and betrayal erupted inside him like a storm. But he forced himself to calm, to think clearly. Acting impulsively might blow up in his face. He needed facts. He needed something more concrete. "Maybe there's an explanation," the last sliver of denial whispered. But the rest of him knew better. He tapped on the messenger icon, typed out a simple, harmless greeting from his fake account. "Hey, beautiful smile." Then he hit send, feeling his pulse pound like a war drum against his ribs. He waited. Seconds felt like hours. He began to think maybe she wouldn't respond. Maybe the profile was old and she'd just never taken it down. That would be a mercy. He clung to it as though it might save his sanity. But then his phone buzzed. "Holly, thanks. What's your name?" A hollow sensation spread in his chest, as if someone had scooped out his insides and left him empty. His hand trembled around the phone. Reality had never felt so harsh, so impossible to deny. She was cheating, or at least she was looking to cheat, flirting with. Possibilities outside their marriage. The woman who kissed him goodbye, who made him coffee, who told him she loved him, was at that very moment responding to strangers on a dating app. This was the beginning of the end. Tom had no idea where to start with his revenge. It wasn't like he could just Google hire a guy to seduce your wife. He'd never anticipated doing anything so twisted. But after discovering Holly's affairs, he couldn't turn away from the blazing anger that consumed him. The betrayal aided him night after night, making his thoughts dark and destructive in ways that scared him. Yet there was also a cold part of him, a calculating sliver of his soul that told him to do this carefully, methodically, so she'd never see it coming. He was sitting at a local dive bar on a Tuesday evening, whiskey in his hand, staring at the swirl of ice in the amber liquid. The jukebox in the corner played an old rock ballad, and the heavy scent of stale beer hung in the air. He barely noticed the worn red upholstery of the stool beneath him. All he could think about was Holly and the unrelenting question, who would she fall for next? If he was going to set her up, he had to pick the right bait. Age, looks, personality, interests. What kind of man would make her lose control and reveal her true self beyond all her cunning and illusions? Then it struck him. Lucas. Tom had met. Lucas maybe twice in passing. The young man was the younger brother of Drew, one of Tom's most loyal cafe employees. Lucas was a theater student at a small arts college downtown, an aspiring actor who'd booked a few small commercials, but was always strapped for cash. More importantly, he looked the part. He had that magnetic confidence, that too handsome face. He could play any role he wanted, adapt like a chameleon, If anyone could tempt Holly in a foolproof trap, it was this kid with a final gulp of whiskey. Tom pulled out his phone and searched for Lucas's social media profile. A few photos popped up. Lucas smiling at auditions. Lucas holding a clapper. Bored on a small film set. He definitely had the kind of charm Holly would go for. Tom typed out a message. Lucas, hey, it's Tom Harrison, Drew's boss. I've got an interesting job for you. Not a movie, but you'll need to play a role. A very well-paid one. If you're interested, let's meet ASAP. He pressed send, and felt a mix of excitement and guilt swirl in his gut. He imagined for a moment. The look on Holly's face when the final trap snapped shut. Part of him felt sick. He'd never stooped so low before, but the thought of her ongoing deceit overrode any sympathy. She made a fool of me, he reminded himself. She lied, manipulated, cheated. She deserves every bit of this. A response from Lucas buzzed in almost instantly. Hey, Tom. Intriguing. Details. Tom's lips quirked in a humorless smirk as he typed. I'll explain in person. Meeting tonight would be best. He sent the address of a bar on the edge of town, a quiet place he'd chosen for privacy. Then he downed the remainder of his whiskey, the burn sliding down his throat and coiling into a bitter warmth in his stomach. First move made. They met later that same evening at a small watering hole far from the center of Chicago's typical nightlife. The sign flickered overhead, half the neon letters dead. A couple of pool tables sat in the back, the felt worn away from years of cheap beers and cigarette ash. Tom spotted Lucas right away, tall, lean, dressed in fitted jeans, a leather jacket, and a confident air that radiated from him. He was the kind of guy you'd expect to see stepping onto a stage under bright lights. As soon as Lucas saw Tom, he slid onto the bar stool beside him and ordered a draft beer. So, Lucas asked after taking the first sip, what's the role you want me to play? Tom sized him up one more time. He had to be sure. Lucas had the posture of someone used to applause, the subtle tilt of his chin, the easy set of his shoulders. Perfect. Tom settled his elbows on the worn bar top. You any good at acting? Tom asked, letting his words come out slow. Testing. Lucas shrugged with a smirk. I've landed a few small commercials, auditioned for bigger things. I get by. Tom rotated his glass in his hand. What if this role isn't for a production? It's for real life. Lucas raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his gaze. Real life, huh? Sounds like a reality show. What's the genre? Revenge, Tom said flatly. Lucas's smirk deepened, but his brows drew together. Revenge on who? Tom stayed quiet for a heartbeat. My wife. Lucas set his beard down, not too gently. Whoa, seriously? Tom didn't flinch. She's cheating, lying. It's bigger than a fling. I've got proof she's been doing this for a long time. Roping in men, conning them, maybe even scamming them for money. I want to trap her so thoroughly that she can't wriggle out with any more lies. Lucas looked a bit shell-shocked. He exhaled slowly and asked, why go this far? You already know. She's sleeping around. Why not just divorce her? Tom's jaw clenched as a wave of bitterness coiled in his gut. Because I don't want her to spin some how story. I don't want her version of the truth to ruin me. I want her caught on camera in front, for other lovers so nobody can doubt what she's been doing. His knuckles whitened on the glass. I want them all to see who she really is. Lucas tapped his fingers on the scarred bar top. He finally said, so I'm guessing you want me to seduce her, make her trust me. Tom gave a curt nod. Exactly. I want you to be the kind of guy she can't resist. You'll string her along, set her up, I'll take care of the rest. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant crack of pool balls in the back and the hum of dim overhead lights. Eventually, Lucas spoke. It's insane. But if you're paying, Tom grabbed a napkin, jotted down a large sum, and slid it over. Lucas lifted it close enough to see the number under the bar's faint glow, then let out a low whistle. Holy yeah. That's more than I'd make in a year's worth of commercials, Lucas said, disbelief tinging his voice. So we do this. And then I walk. Away with that. Tom's eyes glinted. Yes, you just have to follow my lead, and when the time comes, we spring the trap. Then you're free. Lucas swallowed, nodding. All right, man, I'm in. Tom took a deep breath. Good. Now I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about her. Her likes, her weaknesses, the lines that work, the little gestures that drive. Her crazy. Lucas listened carefully, occasionally typing quick notes in his phone. Tom explained how Holly was addicted to the thrill, the secret phone messages, the seductive tasks, the elaborate scenarios that made her feel powerful. He described the subtle ways she tested men, how she teased them just enough to spark obsession. This is her profile, Tom said, opening the dating app. Check out what she wrote. Open to new adventures. She's not even subtle. Lucas angled the phone, reading with a faint smirk. Wow. Okay, let's set up my account. They worked on it for nearly an hour, crafting a bio that would hook someone like Holly. I don't play by the rules. Life's more fun when you make your own. I like when conversation turns into a challenge and the night doesn't end where you think. If you know how to take risks, let's see how far we can go. Lucas uploaded a few of his professional headshots that radiated confidence. Then, with a final click, he tapped search. Holly's profile was the first to appear fresh and bold. Lucas snorted. Man, so she's just out here waiting to be caught. Tom said nothing. He just gestured at Lucas's phone. Lucas typed a short, intriguing first message. I saw your profile. Let's talk about these new adventures. They sat there, breath held, waiting to see if she'd respond. Tom's stomach twisted, even though I know how she is, even though I expect her to answer. A soft ding chimed on Lucas's phone. Just seconds later. Tell me more. Lucas stifled a laugh and looked at Tom, whose face was grim. I guess we're on. Tom raised a hand. Not too fast. Let her wait. Anticipation is half the thrill for her. Lucas locked his phone. Sure, I'll follow your lead. Tom swirled the last of his whiskey. The barest trace of a smile touched his lips. Then let's make it convincing. Over the next several days, Tom choreographed every message Lucas sent to Holly, controlling the pace of her descent into the trap. He knew exactly how to tug at her hidden desires, how to push her into chasing that rush. Holly responded like a moth to a flame, initially cautious but eager, the same method Tom had seen in her old messages to other men. But while Lucas reeled her in, Tom had his own moves. At home, Holly continued to act like the devoted wife, cooking dinner, asking about his coffee shops, smiling at him across the dining table. She had no idea he was engineering her biggest downfall. One night they were having rosemary roasted turkey for dinner, the savory aroma filling the kitchen. Tom carefully sliced into the meat, but his mind was miles away, remembering the notifications he'd seen on Lucas's phone. Holly had sent 4 messages in the last hour alone. She was completely hooked. Holly casually asked, "How are things at the cafes? Didn't you say you had trouble with a barista stealing cash last month?" He chewed slowly, forcing his voice to stay level. "Yeah, we caught him. He gave the money back, but I let him go. Once trust is broken, it's over." Her eyes flicked to him at the word trust. A faint tension crossed her face before she smoothed it over with a tiny shrug. Makes sense. Sometimes lies deserve consequences. A faint buzzing against the table startled them both. Holly's phone. She glanced at the screen and Tom watched her expression shift just for half a heartbeat, the corners of her lips twitching in excitement. She locked the phone, turning her attention back to him, a practiced mask of innocence. "Work?" he asked with mild interest. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah, nothing urgent." Tom smirked into his whiskey glass. "Sure." Inside, his anger simmered. She's lying to my face, texting her new fling right here at the dinner table. Still, he forced a smile. He wanted to see how far she would go. One morning, after Holly left for a salon appointment, Tom opened her laptop and clicked on the keylogger he'd installed. Every keystroke she'd made was listed there. Usernames, passwords, secret accounts. He logged into her personal messages. This is going to hurt, he thought grimly. It did. He read through conversations with multiple men, guys in different states and different walks of life. She told them she was trapped in a loveless marriage, that Tom was cold and distant, or that she was on the verge of divorce. She even implied he was abusive to gain their sympathy. Tom trembled with rage. He kept scrolling, determined to see the full extent of her deceit. She asked some men for money, weaving down stories about her business. Tom discovered her boutique had gone under nearly a year ago. She'd never told him. She'd let him believe she was still traveling for floral conventions while it had long since dissolved. She'd been living off him and scamming random men for extra cash. Tom stared at the screen, breath ragged, and downed half a tumbler of whiskey in one go. She's not just having fun, she's a professional manipulator. He felt sick to his stomach, every love note or seductive text like acid burning through him. But beneath the nauseating pain, a grim determination formed. She wants a game. We'll give her one she'll never forget. That night, Tom and Lucas met again in the same bar. Lucas looked tense, churning a coaster between his fingers. Man, I gotta say, I'm starting to see a pattern. She's into it. Big time. Tom's gaze was cold. She's hooked on the thrill. She'll keep going until she destroys herself, or until we do. For her. Lucas exhaled, setting the coaster down. All right, then what's next? Tom slid his phone across the table. Send her this. He said on the screen was a typed message. I want you to do something for me, something that proves how far you'll go. Write my name in red lipstick on your inner thigh. Take a picture. Keep it there all day under your clothes. Let me know you're thinking of me, even if everyone around you has no idea. Lucas squirmed. She'll do it. Tom's lips twisted into a bitter smile. She'll do anything for that rush. Lucas typed the message. Hit send and set his phone down. We wait. Tom gave a grim nod. We wait. The next day, Holly was having coffee with her sister Janet, who had been increasingly vocal about Holly's reckless behavior. They were at a busy cafe near Janet's home, sipping lattes. Janet's toddler was with the sitter, so for once, she had an hour of peace. Holly's phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a single name, Lucas. She snatched it quickly, smiling the kind of smile Janet recognized all too well. Anticipation. Holly read his instructions and practically beamed with excitement. Janet sighed, voice hushed. Holly, I've tried to talk to you about this. I know you like the chase, but what if Tom's already suspicious? You can't juggle men forever. Holly shrugged, not even looking up. Tom, he's blind to this stuff. He trusts me. He's not stupid, Hall, Janet insisted. You're playing with fire. You think you're in control, but someday... Look, Holly cut her off. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not stopping. If it were that big a deal, Tom would have confronted me by now. He's as clueless as always. Holly pushed back from the table and stood up, phone in hand. Be right back, she said, heading for the restroom. Janet watched her go with a pit in her stomach. She had covered for her sister once or twice, but this was bigger, darker. Holly's going off a cliff, she thought, and I can't stop her. Holly disappeared into the bathroom. Moments later, she emerged with a slight flush on her cheeks. That phone clutched tight. The expression on her face told Janet she'd done exactly what Lucas wanted. At home, Tom waited. He was in the living room, phone in hand, when it buzzed. A text from Lucas. No words, just a photo. Tom's heart pounded as he opened it. Holly's bare thigh with Lucas scrawled in crimson lipstick right near the hem of her skirt. The shot was... and shameless. Tom forced himself not to hurl the phone across the room. She's that far gone. His chest felt like it might burst with both rage and sorrow, but he'd come too far to turn back now. Time to up the stakes. He typed a simple reply to Lucas. Phase 2, make her do something even bigger. The more Holly got dragged in, the more reckless she became. The subtle caution that once kept her from getting caught evaporated. Her texts to Lucas arrived at all hours. Even while Tom was in the same room, she started forgetting to hide her phone screen. She was itching for bigger thrills. Tom recognized the pattern. She's itching for the next challenge, so he planned one that was nearly impossible for her to refuse. Bold, shocking, humiliating. He had Lucas send, "I want you to record a private video for me. Show me exactly how you think about us, what you imagine when you're alone at night." Holly replied within minutes. A string of flirty messages. "I love where your mind goes. Tell me how you want it." Then she sent a sensual photo. Just a teaser. Tom's stomach twisted. He knew she'd do the full video soon enough, and she did. While Tom was supposedly at a late meeting, Holly used the bedroom, setting her phone at the perfect angle. But Tom had set up hidden cameras in that very room weeks ago. She thinks she's so secretive. Tom found the footage that evening, pulled the small camera from its hiding spot, and watched just enough to confirm she'd gone through with it. He felt an icy hollowness in his chest. She's truly lost in her own fantasy. That was the moment he decided to go all in. Revenge required a spectacle, something that left no doubt in anyone's mind who Holly was and what she did. Tom crafted a plan so elaborate it felt surreal. He spent hours making calls, scheduling an unusual rental space in an old industrial building near Wrigleyville. The top floor boasted a wide-open area that once housed an eccentric artist's installations, complete with bizarre mechanical sculptures. And famously, a large rotating circular platform once used for performance art. Tom learned about it through a contact who specialized in underground events. It'll do perfectly. Next, he quietly reached out to the men in her life. He posed as Holly on each account, inviting them all to a very private, exclusive get-together in Wrigleyville, 9 p.m. sharp, promising them something special, something life-changing. Most of them jumped at the chance, no questions asked. She teased each, one with illusions of a magical evening, and they were all hungry for that final reward. Finally, he prepared the final instruction to Lucas, who by now seemed half fascinated, half horrified by Tom's meticulous cruelty. Tell her to dress in something easy to remove. Step by step, she'll follow clues into the building until she's wearing almost nothing but a negligee. "We'll have the rotating circle ready at the top floor," Lucas responded. "Wow, you're sure about this?" "It's next level," Tom typed back. "Trust me, she'll go for it." The trap night arrived. Holly told Tom her usual lie. "I've got to check on the boutique. My manager's calling in sick." Tom gave her a tight smile. "Take your time," he said. "I'll probably just watch a game and crash early." She threw him a quick wave and darted out, barely hiding her excitement. The second the door closed, Tom exhaled. Showtime. An hour later, under the glow of streetlights, Holly's taxi pulled up to a brick building in a quiet area near Wrigley Field. The old sign above the door was half rusted, leftover from when it was an art studio. She checked her phone. A message from Lucas read, "Come upstairs. Leave me a trail of what you're wearing. I want to follow the pieces like breadcrumbs so I can find you waiting." Holly felt a surge of adrenaline. She slipped off her gloves right in the stairwell, leaving them on a lower handrail. She left her shoes on separate steps, one on the third step, another on the fifth, her bare feet lightly padding on the cool concrete. The building was mostly dark, save for a faint glow coming from above. Her phone buzzed again. Now your stockings, then your blouse, then your skirt. She obeyed, a grin twitching on her lips. She was down to a sheer, almost transparent negligee, excitement coursing through her. She couldn't wait to see Lucas's face when he realized how far she'd go. A man in black, wearing a half mask, met her at the top of the stairs. Silent, he gestured her forward into a cavernous, dimly lit space. The only prominent light came from a large circle in the center of the floor, a mechanical platform, chest-high with metal railings around it, reminiscent of some bizarre carnival ride. Surrounding the circle, flickering industrial lights cast dramatic shadows on the walls. The place smelled faintly of dust and old metal. Holly approached, heart pounding. "Lucas," she called softly, half expecting him to pull off the mask. The man said nothing, just pointed to the rotating platform. She noticed it had handcuffs attached to the metal bar that curved over the top, like a bizarre performance piece. Instead of feeling alarmed, Holly felt a wicked thrill. This is insane, and I love it. She climbed onto the circle. The man gently guided her wrists to the cuffs, locking them in place above her head and slightly behind, so she couldn't easily maneuver out. She let out a shaky laugh, half from excitement, half from adrenaline. "I've never done anything like this," she murmured. "But I'm game." The man stepped back, leaving her there in the ring of light, her sheer lace negligee leaving little to the imagination. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the platform whirred softly, shifting under her weight, rotating in a slow circle. She felt a flush spread across her face. Okay, so he's going to come out and see me like this. Suddenly, a bright, harsh spotlight snapped on from above, aimed right at her eyes. She squinted, letting out an involuntary cry of surprise. "Hey, that's too bright." She blinked, disoriented by the glare. A figure stepped forward through the shadows, and as soon as she saw him clearly, her heart seized in her chest. It was Tom. His face was stony, unreadable. The overhead spotlight showed her husband's features set in an expression she'd never seen before, an icy malice that made her blood run cold. Holly felt her mouth go dry, panic surging like a jolt of electricity. "Tom," she gasped, tugging at the cuffs. They rattled against the metal. "What are you? Why are you here? Let me go." He didn't budge. Not yet. She tried to twist her body, but the rotating circle kept her arms pinned overhead. "This isn't funny." Her voice pitched higher. Fear fluttered in her stomach. "Take off these cuffs." Tom stepped aside, and from the shadows more figures emerged, each illuminated by the rotating spotlight as the platform turned. Holly's pulse thundered. She recognized them. Kevin, Jack, Mark. Men she'd seduced with her lies. They all looked confused or furious or both. One by one they came into the light. Kevin's eyes were full of hurt. "Holly," he croaked. "What the hell is going on? You said you wanted a special night, just me and you." Jack cut in, voice sharp. "No, she told me it'd be the two of us. She said I was the only one." Mark swore under his breath. "This is insane. Who are all these guys?" A few more emerged. Austin, Ben, Robin, faces flushed with betrayal. All men. Holly had juggled. They stared at her, chained in place, wearing almost nothing on a rotating circle. Some looked disgusted, others in shock, others barely containing their rage. Holly's chest rose and fell in panicked gasps. "Please," she rasped to Tom. "Untie me. This is humiliating. I can explain." Tom's voice was cold. "I bet you can. You've explained away everything else in your life, including me." He pulled out a phone, aimed its camera at her. The platform turned slowly, letting every man see her from all angles. "You love being the center of attention, don't you, Holly? Getting men to pay your bills, lying for money, spinning stories about your worthless husband. Let's hear it, since you're so good at talking." She swallowed hard, twisting her body. "Tom, you're scaring me." "Good." His lips curled into a cruel smile. He waved an arm at the men who were glaring at Holly. "Gentlemen, you all thought she was yours, right? The texts, the sweet promises, the warm stories about how miserable her marriage was." Kevin stepped forward, voice trembling with hurt. "You told me you needed money for your boutique." "I gave you thousands," Jack spat. "You said you'd travel the world with me, leaving your jerk husband behind. You said you were about to file for divorce." Robin's hands balled into fists. "You said I was the only man you'd ever do adventurous things with. You sent me pictures like—" "Shut up!" Holly screamed, tears of humiliation brimming in her eyes. She tried in vain to cover herself. The eye. Negligee left almost nothing hidden. "Tom, stop this. Let me go and we can talk, please." The circle whirred again, speeding up slightly. Tom's face hardened. "Talk? You love to talk, especially when you're weaving your lies, but tonight you're going to be honest for once." He pressed a button on his phone. A large projector screen flickered to life on the opposite wall, showing a collage of Holly's messages sent to different men on different nights. The same lines repeated, the same manipulations. Then a video popped up, her own phone camera footage. The men watched as on screen. Holly called Lucas's name in a sultry voice. Is that how you got me? Kevin asked bitterly. Was I just one more name on your list? Holly's voice cracked. Kevin. Her cheeks flamed as she watched the damning evidence spill onto the screen. The men all saw it. The kisses, the skimpy photos, the money transactions. Then it cut to screenshots from her dating app chats. The illusions shattered like broken glass. I loved you, Kevin whispered, tears welling. I was going to propose. I gave you my mom's heirloom bracelet. Holly let out a broken, Kevin, I never wanted. She was cut off by an angry roar from Jack, who lunged forward as though he wanted to strike her. Another man pulled him back. Tom, recording all of it, stepped forward until the lens was practically in her face. Confess, he hissed. Holly was sobbing now, face blotchy, tears dripping onto her chest. I cheated. I'm sorry. Okay, I used you, all of you. Are you happy now? Tom's voice was a hiss of fury. Speak up. They deserve the truth. She glared at him, raw hatred mingling with shame. Fine. I cheated. I lied. I used you all for money. I liked feeling in control. Her words tumbled out in a desperate rush. I'm sorry. All right, just let me go. Tom backed away, panning the camera across the group of men, capturing their reactions. Then he dropped his phone arm to his side. That's enough. He reached for the lever that controlled the rotating circle, slowing it to a stop. Holly dangled, there, breath heaving. Tom, she whispered. What now? Tom gave her a withering look. Now I'm done with you. He turned to walk away, leaving her cuffed. Some of the men, uncertain, looked at each other. Mark, who seemed horrified but also pained, took a step forward. Dude, you can't just leave her like that, Tom shot him a glare. Why not? She doesn't deserve mercy. Mark hesitated, empathy on his face. I don't care what she did to me, you can't leave her like that. This is going too far. Suddenly the tension snapped. One of the other men, big and broad-shouldered, advanced on Tom. You're a twisted... He growled. I don't condone her cheating, but this is torture. Tom stiffened, a sick wave of satisfaction curdling in his gut. Call it what you want. I call it justice. The big man swung a fist. At Tom, Tom tried to duck, but the blow caught his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Another man, who was equally angry at Holly, grabbed the big guy to pull him back. The scuffle escalated. Fists flew. Curses echoed. Holly watched in hysterical panic, twisting against the cuffs, shrieking. Stop, please. Eventually, two men pinned. The big guy back while Tom, breathing hard, straightened his jacket. The group stared at each other, tension sizzling in the air. Let her out of the cuffs, Mark repeated, stepping between Tom and Holly. I'm not leaving until she's free. After a tense moment, Tom scoffed, turning away with an air of chilling finality. Fine. Let her loose if you want. I've got what I need. He glared over his shoulder at Holly, who was trembling, hair plastered to her tear-streaked cheeks. And by the way, Holly. His voice was low, dripping with venom. I filed for divorce this morning. I'll send the papers to your sister's place or wherever the hell you end up. Holly's heart pounded, shock mingling with despair. Tom. But he was already walking away. He shoved open the heavy metal door and was gone, leaving the rest of them. Amid the swirling dust motes, the flickering projector screen still displaying fragments of her betrayal. Mark turned the wheel on the side of the apparatus and undid the cuffs. Holly collapsed into a sobbing heap on the cold metal floor of the circle, arms trembling. One of the men tossed her a discarded coat to cover herself, eyes brimming with both pity and anger. She could barely speak as they gathered around, some scowling, some too numb to talk. One by one they turned and left, leaving her to realize the extent of the nightmare. She had chased danger and secrecy for so long and never noticed the trap that had been slowly closing around her. Epilogue: the divorce. Barely a week later, Tom sat in his attorney's upscale office, signing the final batch of documents. He felt strangely hollow. A dull sense of relief, maybe, but no real happiness. What is there to celebrate? 6 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of paperwork. His lawyer, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a crisp suit, flipped through the pages. "All right," she said, capping her pen. "We'll file these with the court. Given her actions, you'll have a strong case. She can't dispute much without the evidence you provided." Tom nodded. The evidence, the damning videos, the photos of Holly's multiple lovers, the texts. He had it all. The settlement would be heavily in his favor. "So that's it," he said, standing up. "We're done." She gave a small sigh. "Technically, it'll take a couple of months to finalize. But yes, she has zero grounds to contest after that display." He thanked her and walked out into the brisk Chicago afternoon. Months later, they divorced. The news spread among friends and acquaintances, each one either stunned or whispering behind Tom's back. Holly's sister, Janet, tried to call him multiple times only to be met with silence. He was done with all of them.